In today's video, I want to talk to you about choosing stitches when you're doing a hand embroidery project. Hi, I'm Kim Jamieson-Hirst of Chatterbox Quilts. And recently I've been working with hand embroidery. And in a previous video, I was giving you inspiration for how to make your own hand embroidery designs. And I used this, which is a quilt stencil, to create the project I'm going to work with today and talk about today. So you can see that this has got a lot more going on than what I actually did with it. I only chose part of the stencil to trace that I was going to embroider with. And so then after I had traced it, I had to fill it in with some embroidery stitches. Now, the quilt stencil gave me no indication of what kind of embroidery stitches I should use. That was going to be all up to me. So I had lots of fun deciding on the stitches I was going to use in the different areas in this particular design. So the first thing I had to decide was how filled in did I want this design to look. Did I want to have it completely covered with stitches using perhaps a satin stitch, right? Where you wouldn't see any of the background fabric at all. And I decided no, I still wanted to see some of the background fabric. So that automatically changed up how I was thinking about, covering the background, or covering the fabric, I should say. And so I knew right away I wasn't going to use satin stitches in this, and I was going to be using a variety of other stitches instead. But then again, I had to figure out what stitches and what color thread. I mean, that's really the fun part, right? All the different colors of thread you can use. So here are some of the threads. I think these are all the threads I used in this design. So you can see here I've got some embroidery floss, this regular 6-strand embroidery floss that I used in it. And I also used, this is actually sashiko thread. And then I also used some 8-weight pearl cotton. This is from Wonderfill, actually. It's eleganza. So these are the threads that I worked with in the design. So different weights, different types of thread as well, but they're all cottons. Okay, so first I've got the colors picked, right? Then I had to think about the stitches. So not only did I have to think about the stitches, I had to think about the thickness of the stitches I wanted, and I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. So one of the first things I did is I did I actually have another thread that I don't have here right now. I had used a metallic variegated thread to do the outside, kind of define the areas of this flower, and that was with a backstitch. Okay, so I had the areas all defined, and then I had to decide what to put in those areas, right? So in the center, I chose French knots. That's often what I choose for the center of a flower. So I used the yellow embroidery floss for that. And I used, I believe it was 3 strands. I didn't use all 6. I used 3 strands. And I think I just used maybe 2 turns around the needle for the French knot. Okay, so they're not huge, but I put a bunch of them in the center there. And I decided, where that center was going to be because, I could have kept going, right? So I decided this is going to be the center of my flower. Finish those. Then I decided I was going to put some stitches in here. And these are, you could just call them straight stitches or long and short stitches, but I alternated them with a long stitch, a short stitch, a long stitch, a short stitch. And I used a darker color in here, that darker pink color in here. So I did that moving into this area. And this is actually quite a big area, as you can see in here. And I decided not to have these stitches go, all the way out to the edges. I could have done that, but I thought that might be a little much. Even these stitches here are quite long. And I thought, heading out into, well, especially this area, would have been really, really long stitches. I didn't think it was going to look very good. So I decided to add something else in there instead. So I actually have 2 stitches going on here. I've got a single chain stitches, or I should say lazy daisy stitch is really what they are. Same thing, basically. A lazy daisy stitch is like a chain stitch if it's just a single stitch. And I did those in a darker pink, not as dark as this. I think this was the sashiko thread I used here, but the darker embroidery floss, again with the 3 strands. And then I used the lighter pink to put a French knot in each of these. I think I just wound it once around the needle. So that gave kind of a cute little look in there. And there's a contrast too between these long stitches and these more rounded stitches that I use, that combination of the 2 stitches. So that gives a nice contrast in there as well. So that adds some extra interest. Then I was moving out to this outer area here, and here I did use the 6 strands of embroidery floss because I wanted a heavier look. So these are just straight stitches. You might call them seed stitches, but they are going in, kind of forming like a little half flower, if you will. And then again, I used the 6 strands and I did French knots again. So you can see the difference between these French knots and the little ones here, right? Because here I wound them a couple of times, but I'm also using the 6 strands rather than just 3 that I used here. So when you're working with different stitches and you're working with, especially the embroidery floss that has 6 strands, you could use 1 strand if you wanted. We don't often use that, but 2 strands as opposed to 6 gives you quite a different look, even if you were doing the same stitch. So, and that's what I did in this area. Then of course I had my little leaf and stem, and here I used a chain stitch to join the flower to its leaf. And I used just a running stitch around the outside of the leaf, a back stitch going inside a little bit, and then a nice little fly stitch in the center, because again, that leaf is too big to just leave it all open. So I wanted to add some additional details inside of it. So I really like how this turned out. I could have used all different kinds of combination of stitches in here. I stuck with some fairly simple ones, but I was keeping in mind differences in colors of thread. I was keeping in mind contrast between these straight stitches, these rounded stitches. Here I've got a combination of both, right? So some contrast adds some additional interest. If I had gone through and used this, through the entire flower, I don't think it would have been nearly as interesting. So it's fun to play with different stitches. It's fun to play with different strands, if you will. As I mentioned, either a 2 strand or 6 strand or whatever. If you're using a pearl cotton, there's a big difference between a 3 and say an 8 or a 12 pearl cotton as far as the thickness of the thread. So you can play around with that and have lots of fun with them. And it just makes a cute little design, little project that I created all by myself. Now, I mentioned earlier in the video that I had taken this design from the quilting stencil, and I've done a previous video giving you ideas for inspiration for making your own hand embroidery designs. So if you're wondering about that, don't worry, I got you covered. Check out this video that has all the information that you need. And for more helpful quilting information, be sure to go to my website at www.chatterboxquilts.com.